All right, so let's jump right into it with this deep dive. We're going back to the 1980s.
Back to the 80s.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative.
SDI.
You know, the one everybody called Star Wars.
Yeah.
And we're doing it, by the way, using some declassified FBI documents.
Oh, wow.
So this isn't going to be like, dry policy papers. This is going to be investigations, internal communications.
Right.
Like a real peek behind the curtain of a program that had, the whole world talking.
It's a unique perspective for sure.
Yeah.
These documents give us a glimpse into how the FBI, viewed SDI.
Yeah.
And all the potential threats they saw, like lurking around every corner.
Right.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. And so our first stop is going to be Auburn University in 1986.
Okay.
Now, you might not picture Auburn as like a hotbed of space research.
Right.
But suddenly they were raking in millions in SDI funding.
Wow.
Grabbing headlines across the U.S.
Yeah.
What's interesting is this attention all seemed to coincide with a sudden spike in interest from the Soviets.
The Soviets.
Yeah.
That's
specifically regarding a bronze plaque at the university. What do you make of that?
Well, on the surface, a bronze plaque seems like an odd thing for Soviet intelligence to be, interested in.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, this is like the peak of the Cold War.
Right.
SDI, with its potential to create a space-based missile shield, was seen as, a game changer.
Yeah.
Anything, even a seemingly, insignificant plaque could be viewed as potential cover for something more.
Yeah.
You never know
right.
what it could be hiding.
It's like, what are they really after?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Adding to the mystery, a Soviet scientist actually visited Auburn around this time, seemingly more interested in the SDI research than the plaque itself. The FBI files actually note that he was supposedly there to lecture on a numerical analysis library at Moscow State University. But the timing definitely raises some eyebrows, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The FBI was understandably suspicious. Mm. They were operating in a world where, scientific collaborations were often intertwined with, national security concerns.
Yeah.
Was this scientist genuinely interested in academic exchange? Or was there a more clandestine motive at play? It's hard to say for certain.
Right.
But the FBI clearly saw it as, a potential threat.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just Auburn. There's also mention of another Soviet scientist.
Really?
Yeah, connected to Latvia State University, who was supposed to come to the U.S. for research on laser spectroscopy of crystals in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
This trip ultimately fell through.
That's right.
Yeah.
And while we don't know the exact reasons why that visit didn't happen, the FBI was clearly keeping a close eye on these kinds of scientific exchanges. Yeah. They were concerned about the potential for technology transfer and espionage. Remember, the Soviets were highly motivated to acquire, Western technology, especially anything related to military capabilities.
Right.
Absolutely.
Speaking of potential espionage,
let's
move on to another interesting case highlighted in these files. This one focuses on Dr. James Floyd Scott, a physics professor at the University of Colorado.
Okay.
He specialized in lasers and astrophysics.
Interesting.
Two fields very relevant to SDI research, of course.
And what makes his case particularly intriguing is that Scott was married to a Soviet citizen.
Oh, wow.
A former translator.
Okay.
At the Institute of Physical Problems in Moscow.
Okay.
She had also studied English at an institute known to train intelligence officers.
So the FBI had their suspicions.
I can imagine.
Especially since Scott was actively trying to secure SDI funding.
Wow.
While also making trips to the USSR.
Okay.
And during one of those trips in 1982, things took a rather suspicious turn. Oh, really? Scott met with Soviet intelligence agents.
Oh, my God.
Who requested detailed reports on U.S. physics research, laser technology, even his previous work at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where he held a security clearance.
That's a significant red flag for the FBI.
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
Right.
Here you have a U.S. scientist with access to, sensitive information.
Right.
Being asked to share that knowledge with Soviet intelligence.
Yeah.
While the documents don't explicitly confirm whether Scott complied with those requests, the FBI certainly saw him as a potential security risk.
Yeah. What I find fascinating is that unlike other Americans married to Soviet citizens, Scott had no issues getting his wife out of the USSR. He was even able to return for visits without any problems.
Really?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there was something more to his story than meets the eye.
It certainly adds another layer of intrigue, doesn't it? Was Scott naive, simply caught in the crosshairs of the Cold War? Or was there something more deliberate going on?
Yeah.
The documents don't give us definitive answers, but they definitely raise a lot of questions about Scott's motivations and his potential involvement in espionage.
Right. Now, let's take a step back and look at the broader context of SDI. We have a declassified program overview document that outlines the official rationale and goals of the program.
All right.
What are some of the key takeaways here?
Well, the document really emphasizes SDI's role in enhancing deterrence, potentially countering, Soviet offensive capabilities.
Yeah.
And addressing the growing threat of, ballistic missile proliferation. It frames SDI as a purely defensive measure. Designed to protect the U.S. and its allies from attack.
Right. But as we've already seen with the cases of Auburn University and James Floyd Scott, the line between offense and defense was often blurred during the Cold War.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it's important to remember that SDI was being developed during a period of significant, geopolitical shifts.
Yeah.
Reagan's hardline stance toward the Soviet Union eventually gave way to a more conciliatory approach.
Right.
Under his successor, George H.W. Bush. The SDI program evolved alongside these changes.
Yeah.
With its goals and justifications adapting to the changing international security environment.
Yeah, this document also dives into some of the technological concepts behind SDI, including a brief mention of something called brilliant pebbles.
Brilliant pebbles.
Yeah.
This was one of the more ambitious and controversial concepts to come out of the SDI program.
Yeah.
It envisioned a space-based defense system comprised of, a constellation of small, highly maneuverable interceptors.
Oh, wow.
Capable of destroying enemy missiles in their boost phase.
Yeah.
Essentially a swarm of, high-tech pebbles in space.
Yeah.
Ready to take down incoming missiles.
Wow.
Sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It definitely does. Now, brilliant pebbles sparked a lot of debate at the time about its feasibility, cost, and even its potential to, destabilize the strategic balance between the superpowers.
Right. And while it was ultimately never fully developed, brilliant pebbles represented, the kind of outside-the-box thinking that SDI was known for.
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground already. Suspicious Soviet interest in Auburn University, the intriguing case of James Floyd Scott, and even touched on the broader policy goals and technological concepts behind SDI. It's clear that the FBI was keeping a close eye on potential threats to this program, both from within and outside the U.S.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that these documents offer a window into not just the technological aspects of SDI, but also the political and personal dramas.
Right.
That unfolded in his shadow.
Right.
Really fascinating.
Yeah. And we're not done yet. Stay with us as we continue to delve into the FBI's files on SDI. We'll uncover more cases, more secrets, and explore the complex interplay of science, espionage, and international intrigue that defined this era.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be good. I'm excited.
Me too.
All right.
Welcome back.
Picking right back up on this deep dive. That's right. Looking into SDI.
We are. And things are about to get even more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You're not kidding. The next document reads like something straight out of a spy novel.
Oh.
It details a suspected attempt by Soviet intelligence to infiltrate Auburn University's SDI Research, specifically their work on high-powered capacitors for space-based weapons.
It's a fascinating case.
Yeah.
Auburn was developing these capacitors that could deliver, a lot of power while being small and lightweight.
Right.
Which was essential for anything intended for, orbit.
Yeah.
This technology was, the forefront of SDI research.
Right.
And it seems the Soviets were very interested in getting their hands on it.
So are we talking actual spying here, like secret agents and clandestine meetings?
That's what the FBI suspected. They were worried about the potential for the Soviets to, compromise the research, either through direct espionage or by influencing the researcher to unknowingly reveal sensitive information.
So did they catch the spy? What happened?
That's where the story gets a little frustrating. The document is heavily redacted in that section.
Oh, no.
We get these tantalizing glimpses into the investigation.
Right.
But some details remain classified.
Okay.
Perhaps, for national security reasons, or maybe the investigation simply didn't yield, conclusive results.
Right.
Hard to say.
It's too bad because even without all the details, it really paints a picture of the Cold War's, climate of paranoia and suspicion. It seems like every interaction, even in academia, was viewed through the lens of, potential espionage.
Absolutely. And it highlights the challenges the FBI faced in safeguarding cutting-edge technology.
Yeah.
I mean, the lines between scientific collaboration and potential threats were incredibly blurry, especially during the Cold War.
Right. Let's move on to another document that highlights that constant threat of espionage. This one focuses on a lesser-known aspect of SDI.
Okay.
The development of advanced sensors for detecting and tracking enemy missiles.
This was a critical part of the whole SDI concept.
Yeah.
After all, even with the most sophisticated weapon systems, you're essentially blind without effective sensors to identify and locate the targets.
Right.
Absolutely.
The document specifically mentions research on something called infrared focal plane arrays.
Oh, infrared focal plane arrays.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly high-tech.
It is.
But I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what that means.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
These infrared focal plane arrays were essentially the eyes of the SDI system.
Okay.
Imagine a grid or an array of, tiny infrared detectors, each sensitive to the heat emitted by objects.
Okay.
These arrays were designed to be incredibly sensitive, capable of detecting the faint heat signature of a missile launching from thousands of miles away.
So they were looking for a heat trail?
Yes.
Against the cold backdrop of space.
Exactly. This technology was still in its early stages during the SDI era, but it held immense promise for creating a truly global missile defense network.
Right. And naturally, the FBI was concerned that the Soviets were trying to steal the sensor technology as well.
The document details an incident where the FBI suspected Soviet intelligence might have been attempting to recruit a U.S. scientist.
Oh, wow.
Working on, infrared sensor technology.
Yeah.
They were worried about the possibility of the scientist being coerced into sharing, proprietary information, or even worse, defecting to the Soviet Union.
So we're seeing a pattern here first, Auburn's capacitor research, and now the sensor technology.
Yeah.
The FBI seemed convinced that the Soviets were targeting SDI research across the board.
Yes, and that aligns with what we know about Soviet intelligence activities during the Cold War. They were highly motivated to acquire Western technology by any means necessary, especially anything with military applications.
Right.
And they had a vast network of spies operating within the U.S. and its allies.
It makes you wonder how much of SDI's development was driven by genuine technological advancement versus like a reaction to, perceived Soviet threats.
Right.
Was it a necessary response to a real and growing danger? Right.
Or was it, as some critics argued, an overblown and potentially destabilizing arms race in space?
That's a question that continues to be debated by historians. There's no easy answer.
Right.
What's clear from these documents is that the FBI at least viewed the Soviet threat as very real and imminent.
Okay, so we've seen how the FBI viewed SDI through the lens of espionage and, technology transfer. But these documents also reveal a more collaborative side to the program. It wasn't just a purely American endeavor, was it?
That's right. The U.S. did reach out to some of its allies, especially in Europe, to explore the possibility of collaborating on, SDI research and development.
There's a document that mentions the U.K. being particularly interested in SDI's potential applications for defending against, tactical ballistic missiles,
right,
which were seen as a growing threat in the European theater.
That makes sense. Yeah. Europe was geographically much closer to the Soviet Union, and the deployment of, Soviet intermediate-range missiles in the 1980s had heightened anxieties about a potential conflict.
Right. Naturally, they were keen to explore any technology that could provide a defense against these new threats.
But even with its allies, the U.S. was cautious about sharing too much sensitive technology.
Right.
The documents show that there were concerns within the FBI about the potential for SDI technology to fall into the wrong hands, even if it was shared with friendly nations.
That's understandable. Technology transfer is always a delicate issue, especially when it involves military applications.
Right.
The U.S. government had to balance, the benefits of international collaboration with the risks of sensitive information being leaked or used for purposes that could ultimately harm U.S. interests.
So we're seeing a very nuanced picture of SDI emerge from these documents. It wasn't just about building a space-based missile shield.
Right.
It was about navigating this complex web of political and technological challenges, balancing international collaboration with national security concerns, and operating in a world where the threat of espionage was constant.
Yes. And it reminds us that even the most ambitious technological endeavors are ultimately shaped by, human factors,
right,
the decisions of policymakers, the actions of scientists and engineers, and the ever-present undercurrents of, geopolitical rivalry and mistrust.
Right.
It's a reminder that technology is never developed in a vacuum.
It's been fascinating to see how these individual stories and incidents connect to the larger historical narrative of the Cold War, but there's still more to uncover.
There is.
Join us for the final part of our deep dive into the FBI's files on the Strategic Defense Initiative, where we'll explore the ethical and political dimensions of this program and its lasting legacy.
Okay, so we've spent the last two parts of this deep dive uncovering some of the more, clandestine aspects of the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Right.
We've seen how the FBI viewed SDI through the lens of espionage and, technology transfer.
Yeah.
But these files also offer insights into the broader ethical and political debate surrounding, this ambitious program. That's right. These documents reveal that the FBI wasn't just focused on, catching spies.
Right.
They were also grappling with the wider implications of SDI for international relations and, global security.
One document that stood out to me was an internal FBI memo discussing the potential impact of SDI on, arms control negotiations with the Soviet Union.
Oh, wow.
This was a time, remember, when both superpowers possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world many times over?
Right.
I mean, the stakes couldn't have been higher.
Absolutely. Any miscalculation, any escalation of tensions could have led to, unimaginable consequences.
Right.
And this memo acknowledged that SDI had the potential to either facilitate or derail arms control efforts.
So how could SDI have helped with arms control?
Well, some saw it as a bargaining chip, something the U.S. could leverage to pressure the Soviets into making concessions.
Okay.
The idea is that if the U.S. demonstrated a credible ability to defend itself against, a nuclear attack, the Soviets would be more willing to negotiate reductions in their own arsenal.
That makes sense, but how could it have hurt arms control efforts?
The memo also acknowledged that SDI could be perceived by the Soviets as, a provocative move.
Right.
Fueling an arms race and making meaningful agreements even harder to reach.
Yeah.
If the Soviets believed the U.S. was seeking to gain, a strategic advantage through SDI, they might be less inclined to negotiate in good faith.
It sounds like SDI was a bit of a gamble than a double-edged sword, with the potential to either enhance stability or escalate tensions.
Exactly. The memo highlights the complex, political calculations at play. During this period, the Reagan administration had to weigh the potential benefits of SDI against the risks of, alienating allies, provoking the Soviets, and undermining ongoing arms control efforts.
Right. It's fascinating to see how these concerns were playing out, within the FBI as well. They weren't just looking at this program from, a narrow security standpoint. They were also wrestling with the wider moral and political implications of this technology.
Absolutely. And there's another document that really delves into the ethical dimension of SDI.
Okay.
It's a report summarizing a conference on the legal and moral implications of, space-based weapons. This conference brought together experts from various fields, law, philosophy, military strategy, to discuss, the unprecedented challenges posed by SDI.
What were some of the key issues that came up at this conference?
One of the main topics was the application of, just war theory to SDI.
Oh, just war theory.
This theory, as you may know, proposes that there are certain ethical principles that should govern the use of force, even in times of war.
I'm familiar with the concept. So how did SDI fit into that framework?
Well, some argue that SDI, by its very nature, violated these principles.
Okay.
The concern was that it aimed to create a system capable of initiating, a preemptive strike, potentially blurring the lines between offense and defense in the realm of nuclear weapons.
Right. That's a really interesting point. SDI wasn't just about defending against an attack. It could also be seen as an offensive weapon.
Right.
Capable of disrupting an enemy's ability to retaliate.
Exactly. And that raised all sorts of ethical questions. Could a preemptive strike, even one intended to prevent, a larger attack, ever be justified?
Right.
What were the potential consequences of blurring the lines between offense and defense in the context of nuclear weapons? These were heavy questions.
Yeah.
And it's clear that the FBI was aware of, the ethical complexity surrounding SDI.
Were there any other major ethical concerns raised at this conference?
Yes. Another concern was the potential for SDI to militarize space.
Right.
Transforming it from a realm of peaceful exploration into a potential battleground.
That's a debate that's still ongoing today with, the increasing development and deployment of space-based weapon systems. It's a legacy of SDI that we're still grappling with.
It is. The program itself may have ended with the Cold War, but the questions it raised about, the ethics and legality of space-based weapons are more relevant than ever.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways you'd like listeners to consider?
I think it's crucial to remember that SDI wasn't just about, technology. It was a reflection of the hopes and fears of an era, a time when the world teetered on the brink of nuclear annihilation.
Right.
It was a program that captured the imagination, but also sparked anxieties about, the future of humanity.
It's a good reminder that technology is never neutral. It's always shaped by the context in which it's developed and used, and it has the potential to be both a force for good and a source of great danger.
As you reflect on what we've discussed, I encourage you to consider this.
Yeah.
How do the lessons of SDI inform our understanding of the challenges we face in the 21st century?
Right.
We live in a world where new technologies are emerging at an unprecedented pace.
Yeah.
And the lines between war and peace, offense and defense are increasingly blurred.
Right.
It's a question that deserves our careful consideration.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey back to the Star Wars era. It's been a fascinating exploration of a program that continues to shape our world in ways we're still trying to understand.